Greetings, and welcome to Arcana Analysis, where we invite you into the Velvet Room to unlock the secrets of the Arcanum and the bonds they encompass. In this episode, we'll be discussing the Death Arcana. Death is the 13th major arcana, following the Hanged Man and preceding Temperance. Death is a card that can cause quite a bit of panic when it appears in a tarot reading, but this fear is often unfounded. The iconography of the card features skeletons, scythes, and hourglasses, all indicative of the Grim Reaper. Despite this, the card is not actually an omen of physical mortality. Rather, it is death in a more poetic sense. This is the tarot of endings, but also of the new beginnings that those endings inevitably bring. Therefore, death is a card of transition, transformation, and change. It is always a symbol of memento mori, but it aims to remind us of the positivity in endings. The only way to move forward is to leave behind the past, after all. Much like our own human mortality, we cannot escape the passage of time and the change of seasons. It can be important to learn to let go of what is past and embrace what the future brings you. The Persona series takes a more literal approach to the Death Arcana. All those aligned under it have associations to physical death in some way, and the events which connect them to mortality have often had a profound effect on their person, leading to challenges that they must overcome. The holders of the Death Arcana have faced or are facing major upheavals in their life, and may feel powerless against the flow of time and the turning of cycles. Their reactions to their place within these changes varies. While some bemoan their fate, others accept it. In all cases, their association with death puts a barrier between them and standard society, and so they find themselves existing on the fringes and grappling with isolation. The personas aligned under death tend to be deities or figures associated with mortality and excelling in dark-based abilities.
The bearer of the Death Arcana within Persona 3 assumes many forms. As a central player in the narrative, death is ever-present and inescapable, yet they maintain a role of passivity throughout most of the journey. Persona 3's death exemplifies the aspect of change and cycles inherent to the traditional reading of the Arcana, but to truly understand death's many metamorphoses, we must first start at the beginning. The initial iteration of death is that of a shadow, one meant to shepherd Nyx into the world and bring about the destruction of mankind. This event, referred to simply as the Fall, is their grand and glorious purpose, one that is forced into being by members of the Kirijo group. Their malevolent experiments with shadows would attempt to summon death in order to cause the fall, but before the process could be completed, a scientist named Eiichiro Takeba sacrificed himself to sabotage the experiment. This split death into 13 distinct shadows, and also resulted in the Dark Hour phenomenon, as well as the creation of Tartarus. In a desperate attempt to rein in these feral shadows, the anti-shadow weapon Aegis was deployed to hunt down and annihilate the 13th shadow, Death's central body. On the Moonlight Bridge, Aegis sealed away Death inside an orphan, pacifying the creature for the time being. After several years away, the boy would inevitably return to Port Island, where the shadow within him would manifest and take on a new form. Pharos, a small child in a prisoner's uniform, emerges from the protagonist's subconscious and begins acting as a spiritual guide. Every full moon, this specter of death comes to realize more and more about himself and his purpose, each of these encounters taking place in the Death social link. As Pharos, death exists at the edge of human society, with the protagonist his only contact with it. Though ultimately a shadow by nature, Pharos comes to delight in his interactions with the protagonist, viewing them rather fondly. Despite this, when the boy is given a chance at freedom, he gladly takes it. When all 12 of the errant Arcana shadows are defeated by Cease, Pharos is finally capable of taking on a corporeal form. Though his social link is tied to the Fortune Arcana, Ryoji Mochizuki is still an avatar of death. While he is still a shadow by nature, his time within the protagonist has bestowed Ryoji with a true sense of humanity, notable in his sense of empathy. For a time, he is able to interact directly with humanity, but as a holder of the Death Arcana, he cannot escape the social exclusion carried by the card, even if it is self-imposed in his case. Knowing that his existence will inevitably result in the destruction of mankind, he offers the members of Cease a choice. See the destructive power of Nyx firsthand, or kill him and forget about the Dark Hour entirely. This act of mercy would not stop the world from being annihilated, but it would ease the minds of those he views as his friends. He even reveals his true form, Thanatos, to the protagonist in the hopes of further persuading them, but ultimately, the group chooses to witness the fall. Though refusing his offer fills him with sorrow, Ryoji does everything in his power to prepare the members of XIII for their final encounter before the moment arrives. On January 31st, Ryoji shepherds Nyx into the world and becomes the Nyx Avatar, an entity of pure death and destruction, an avatar symbolizing the end of the world's cycle. Even in this final transformation, Nyx Avatar is a very fluid being, transitioning between the various arcana throughout the fight. Even once defeated, the fall continues as if nothing has changed. Destroying the Avatar has not ended anything. Death by nature is a transformative being, and the protagonist brings about the beginning of a new cycle to follow the end of the old one. The metamorphosis of death throughout Persona 3 embodies one of the core tenets of the Arcana. By nature, death is a being plagued by doom. He is coveted by those who seek destruction of the world, and hunted by those who wish to protect it. His existence is tumultuous and ever-changing, but through the embracing of this change, death experiences all the joys and triumphs of humanity. Death exists in relation to society and life, while never truly belonging to it. Death proves that we must not fear the end of things, as it simply marks the beginning of another.
Though far more normal than the Death Arcana preceding her, Hisano Kuroda manages to introduce herself with morbid flair by first appearing as a ghost, and then claiming to literally be death. In truth, Hisano is a mild-mannered and good-natured old woman. On the night that the protagonist first encountered her, she had been visiting her ailing husband, who died soon after. Hisano is grappling with this death, and she cannot forgive herself for her role in it. Slowly, Hisano reveals the story of her and her husband to the protagonist. Each time they speak, she dons black mourning wear and meets him at the edge of a river, hearkening to the mythos of Sanzu, a Styx-like river that the dead must cross to reach the underworld. In her youth, Hisano met her husband through a traveling theater troupe. Every year they would come to town, and every year she would watch him perform. This cycle defined their relationship for quite some time, and they grew closer by exchanging letters. Eventually, this cycle came to an end when the two were married and moved to Inaba together. They lived a humble life, and were happy. In their old age, Hisano's husband developed a degenerative disease, leading his personality to change and his anger to be taken out on her. Despite the dark turn of their relationship, Hisano stayed with him because she knew he was sick and needed support. However, as the disease advanced and he became bedridden in a hospital for the last years of his life, Hisano's husband forgot her completely, and she found herself unable to love him in this state. She could not forgive the loss of their relationship and history, and her feelings for him changed to resentment. He became a burden that she dutifully cared for, every day going to see him, and every day being forgotten by the person she loved. In this process, Hisano drew away from their children and extended family, isolating herself in Inaba with nothing but a husband who no longer knew her. When this cycle became too much for her, Hisano attempted to murder her husband, but was unable to follow through due to him smiling at her and reminding her of the past feelings they shared for one another. So she became content to wait, wishing for his death every time she saw him. When he finally passed, she could not forgive herself for this callousness, and believes she will be damned to hell for it when she dies. For a time, Hisano is trapped in her grief, even attempting to burn the old letters she and her late husband had exchanged in their youth. Eventually, with the protagonist as a listening ear and a reminder of her husband as a young man, Hisano is able to work through her grief and forgive herself. She was a steadfast and true wife, even if her feelings were muddled at the end, and the love she and her husband shared was real. She resolves to put her current self to rest and reclaim the woman she was long ago, when she was young and so deeply in love. She bids farewell to the protagonist, leaving behind Inaba and rejoining the family she had removed herself from.
The bearer of the Death Arcana within Persona 5 is Tai Takemi, a back-alley doctor operating in Yongen-Jaya. Though she is easily associated with the macabre, through both her morbid personality and gothic style, Takemi is most passionate about healing and helping those around her, even if she refuses to admit so. Her tendency to put on airs and act flippantly towards patients stems from tragedy within her past, and her desperate desire to reinvent herself. Within her confidant, we discover that Takemi spent a good deal of time working in a university hospital, researching experimental medication to treat rare diseases. Just when her research began to bear fruit, a superior at the hospital stepped in to seize control of the entire project. This man, Shoichi Oyamada, sought to co-opt Takemi's work to gain fame and fortune, but his meddling only rushed the production of her miracle drug and caused it to be ineffective. The patient they were attempting to heal, referred to simply as Miwa, quickly began to spiral not long after she was treated, causing Oyamada to shift the blame on Takemi. She would suffer for her superior's mistakes, subsequently being blacklisted from the medical community and nicknamed the Plague on account of her volatile nature, the death of her professional career. This series of events brings her to Yongen Jaya, where she aims to develop an improved version of the drug to clear her name. The existence of the back alley clinic is merely a front, a means to a more productive end. This is what leads her to meet the protagonist, whose pursuit of medication for the Phantom Thieves leads him to assist Takemi in testing her experimental medicine. Throughout their time together, the protagonist not only taste tests certain unstable elixirs, but also pushes Takemi to take on new patients from the community. Through these efforts, the once disgraced doctor becomes well known as a miracle worker within Yongen Jaya. Of course, with the arrival of such renown comes ghosts from her past. When word begins to spread of her sudden success, Oyamada begins to tear Takemi down. He presses the pharmaceutical companies to cut ties with her and informs Takemi that Miwa has passed. All of her hard work developing this drug to clear her name as well as save the patient's life is suddenly pointless. This revelation crushes Takemi, causing her to spiral and lose hope altogether. But thanks to the meddling of the Phantom Thieves, it's discovered that Oyamada was deceiving the young doctor and that Takemi still has a chance to do right by Miwa. This ray of hope is all that Takemi needs to regain her motivation and finish developing the drug. By the very end of her confidant, Takemi decides to remain at the clinic, fully embracing the tumultuous change that defined her life. Though her personal project has finally been completed, there are still countless others in Yongen Jaya who she can treat. Takemi is undoubtedly haunted by past mistakes that were never hers to begin with. Her future was seemingly shattered by Shoichi Oyamada, resulting in what she believed to be an end to her career and her social ostracization. Even when she began to reinvent herself, her mind was firmly placed on the world that came before, not on what awaited her in her new life. By the end of her arc, she comes to admire the new path her life has set her on, changing her perspective entirely. While her association to grim darkness does align with the idea of death, her embracing of upheaval in life aligns well with the Death Arcana.
That concludes our examination of the Death Arcana. Many fear death for its uncertain nature, as well as the finality it embodies. Endings can be unpleasant, so much so that we avoid them at all costs.
However, every end brings about a new beginning. Those who understand this arcana embrace the change it carries, and welcome their reinvention with open arms.
We hope you've enjoyed your stay with us in the Velvet Room, and we look forward to seeing you again. Until then, we bid you adieu.